Marriage is super important, and so many people struggle, and we get several questions about making marriage good, fixing marriage. So today we're going to talk about marriage on Bucky Kennedy Podcast. Stay tuned. It's going to be good. Well, I get several questions about marriage, what makes a great marriage, or specific problems within marriages. And of course, my wife and I, we do a marriage conference called Bed Sheets and Spreadsheets. We talk about sex and money. And listen, I've been doing marriage counseling for 35 years in ministry in a lot of ways. And so today, I'm just going to talk about some things that are, I may call them about secrets to a great marriage. They're not really secrets, but there are things that seem to be a secret because we don't practice them sometimes. And so I want to talk to you today about secrets to a great marriage. And let's just say this. I came into my marriage not understanding anything about marriage. My wife and I, we came from two totally different backgrounds. She came from a real touchy-feely type of a family. They just always wanted to be around each other, hugging on each other. My wife could go to the grocery store and be gone for 5 minutes, and we miss you, please come back. I could leave and say, hey, listen, I'm going around the world for about 6 to 8 months. And my folks go, hey, just give us a call when you get back in town. I mean, it was just that type of difference. So we really did have to do a lot of work in our marriage. And now we've been married over 31 years, and I love her more today than I did when we got married. We've got 2 children, got 1 grandchild. So I just want to encourage you with some things here that will help put your marriage where it needs to be, where God intended it to be. God never said that misery was a attribute of marriage, but you meet a lot of people who are miserable in their marriage. So how does it all start out? Well, the first place, the first secret to a great marriage is choice. Who you going to pick to get married? I talk to a lot of people sometimes, and mostly women. They have a great vision for their wedding, not so much a great vision for their marriage. And so who you pick has a lot to do with how your marriage performs and what goes into your marriage. And so when you're dating, you need to have an idea. I know my daughter had a specific idea who she wanted to marry, and she really didn't want to settle or compromise on that. I know several girls that have that great vision about who they want to marry. I know some guys that had the same thing about who they're looking for a wife. And let me just start out this. Marriage is not mandatory. I mean, there are some people that are single and satisfied. I mean, they're happy. So marriage is not a mandatory thing that people have to engage in. But if you're going to get married, if you really want to have a good marriage, it starts with who you pick. Sometimes we're talking to people and man, they just complaining about this and complaining about that. And I just remind them, you picked them. You picked them. And so it's just kind of funny. So you need the first key to starting out a successful marriage is who you select. That really is. I mean, I know that sounds so simple, but just remember, you're picking them. You need to check out their convictions. You need to be sure of their character. And you just need to be looking for some things. I mean, sometimes it's kind of, that eye candy type thing. Man, when you take off the wrapper, you find out you got some bad licorice. How you like that? Bad licorice, eye candy. Oh, that's pretty good. Never mind. Second, moving right along here. Not only is choice a big deal, but you need to understand that marriage is a covenant. It is not a contract. It's 2 people coming together in making a covenant commitment, which means it involves life oaths, that the only thing that can break this is death. That's why you will hear in many of the marriage vows, until death do us part, because that's the ingredient to a covenant. Somebody has to die. And for order for that covenant to end, it's a promise. It's a passionate, purposeful promise based on the principle and integrity of the people making it, and it can only be ended in death. And of course, we need to understand that. Too many people come into marriage like it's a contract. Well, if this person does this and this person does that, we'll be happily married. Now, I understand that there are roles for each individual to play, but they shouldn't be contractual. They shouldn't be sitting there going, well, they didn't do this, so I didn't do that. You need to understand that marriage is a covenant commitment. It's not a contract. And it's not based on duties. It's not based on work requirements. It's not based on performance evaluations. It's not merit-based pay, if you would. It is a covenant agreement that you understand as you stand before God and you ask God to bless your marriage, that marriage is a covenant. And God holds that serious. See, some things we hold lightly, what God values greatly. And marriage is one of those things. God greatly esteems and values marriage. And we need to learn that God's valuation of marriage is what matters. And in that covenant, it brings that to the forefront. This is God's plan and design. And this is going to be a covenant marriage, not a contractual agreement. The third thing, communication. Communication is critical in marriage. Often read sometimes that the number one cause of divorce is lack of communication. And number two is finances. Now I've got this thing, they're mad about the money, so they're not talking. I would also say they're mad about the money, they're not talking to each other, they're not sleeping with each other. There are a lot of things they're not doing because they're mad about money. There's no communication. And a lot of communication in marriages that are just existing is basically critical communication about things like who's going to do this, who's going to do that. There's not really any conversation about ideas, about spiritual things. There's just that communication that must take place in order for them to coexist and tolerate that coexistence together. And so that's what they're communicating about it. They're not communicating their ideas. They're not communicating their thoughts. They're not communicating opinions. And it's just tough. Now, I will say this, in a lot of marriages, men tell me this. Men say, well, preacher, whenever I talk to my wife, and I just tell her, hey, I'd really love to do this, she doesn't handle it well. I mean, all of a sudden, she's thinking she's picking it apart, and I know we can't do it, but she'll say, well, if we make that change, and if you quit your job and you go do this, and who's going to take care of this? How are we going to live? I'm just talking to her about a dream that I have, and she's talking about a reality that she feels. And let me help you with this. The reason that happens is because women are security driven. That's not a criticism, ladies. That's just who you are. You want to know who's going to take care of my children. You're nesters. You're wondering about how are we going to have shelter? How are we going to have food? How are we going to have basic provisions? He's just telling you that what he wants to do is a dream, that if he could do it, if there was some way it was made possible, he'd love to do it. But if you shoot those down constantly, he's not going to talk to you a whole lot. He doesn't know how to communicate in that. And so sometimes it's just about listening and paying attention and letting each other share their dreams, share what they would love to do if anything came about. It's okay to have those conversations without getting into conflict. And so you need to understand it. And then in that communication, there's verbal communication, but then there's that physical communication, the bedroom. So much of what happens or doesn't happen in our verbal communication impacts what happens in the bedroom. It's just reality. It's because we're not communicating well, or how people are talking to each other, or who's helping who in house stuff and like that. For instance, my wife, she's big on love languages. She understands. She loves the 5 love languages. And one of her love languages is acts of service. And so one of the things that really speaks to her, communicates my love to her, is when I help her around the house, whether it's washing dishes or vacuuming or doing yard work. I mean, I kid all the time. Sometimes in marriages, washing dishes is foreplay. I mean, that's just how it works in some marriages. So you need to understand how you communicate. Sometimes you communicate best by just serving one another and doing things that help. That there's not always an instruction to do, but there's an instinct and a reason to do it, because it communicates your help, communicates to that person in your marriage, hey, I'm talking to you. I understand you're busy. You need help around the house. Or, hey, honey, I know you're working hard. And so I want to make sure that when you come home, that it's a safe place, it's a peaceful place. There are many ways to communicate, but it leads us into this communication part. Is the fourth secret to a happy marriage is compassion. It's thinking of the other more than you think about yourself. And Philippians 2 says it's thinking of others more than yourself, or better than yourself. One of the things that I keep hearing sometimes whenever I'm preaching on marriage, there's always said, well, you're probably going to bring up this whole thing about how the wife needs to submit to her husband. Well, let me just help you with that issue of submission. Jesus submitted to his Father. That word submission is the same word that Jesus used when he says, I submitted to my Father. That word helper, that when it says that you're a helpmate, helper was used in the Psalms to describe Jesus. So both of those things that you're talking about, submission and helper and all that, those are words that were attached to Jesus and how he lived and how he walked out his life. He walked it out in submission to his Father. He walked it out as seen as God's helper. So when you have this conflict about submission, it's a mindset that's wrong. Submission is not about superiority or inferiority. Submission is about order and alignment. God made man the head of the family. Man didn't choose that, but God put him in that position. It's his assignment under the authority of God. And so by authority, God has placed man as the head of the family. That's it. That's his assignment. He didn't ask for it, but in order for him to live in obedience and under the authority of the Word of God, that's the position he's got to fulfill. And so, ladies, him being in that position is really putting you in the best way in which God would bless and protect your family. That if he is living out that manly role of loving you like Christ loved the church, where he gives himself up for the church, that is your best. That is the best way it can be. So positionally, when he's living out practically what God has done positionally in his life, he is doing the best thing for your marriage and for your family. So you need to understand that. But men, you need to understand that just because God has given you that position, he didn't say go and be a dictator. That's not what he said. He said that you are to love your spouse and sacrifice yourself for her. You aren't a mandator. You aren't a dictator. You are a sacrificer. Just like Jesus loved the church. How did Jesus love the church? He sacrificed, he served, and he submitted to his Father. So let me ask you something, guys. Who are you submitting to? If you're going to effectively be the spiritual leader of your house, you must submit to your Heavenly Father. Now, we got a question recently about a lady who said, what do you do if your husband is not necessarily concerned about being the spiritual leader? Well, the Bible talks about that. In 1 Peter chapter 3, he's speaking specifically to wives in this area. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husband, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. So in other words, here's what he's saying. You're not going to nag your husband to righteousness. But what you are is you can show him how great it is to live in obedience by respecting him and by loving him and by serving him, to show him that this is what my faith means to me. My faith means this much to me, that I want to live in right relationship with you, and I can't live in right relationship with you if I'm just nagging you all the time. I can't be in right relationship with Jesus if I'm just nagging you all the time. So what I would say is, one, that you're constantly praying and intercede for your husband. Two, that you're living out your faith compassionately and righteously with the heart to please God, not necessarily change your husband's mind, but to please God. And that's how you're living your life. Now, I just want to say this. If you're a woman and you're watching today and you are in a physically abusive situation, you need to call the police. Your pastor's not going to be the first person to call. You need to call the police, and then let your pastor help you through that process. So I'm just telling you right now, if you are in a physically abusive situation today, you call the police. That's your first call. See, because if you go talk to your pastor, his first call should be the police. You don't need to live in danger. You don't need to live with that threat. So let me encourage you. I'm not giving this advice to someone who's in a physically abusive situation. If you're in that situation, you need to get help from the authorities. But in this whole idea of compassion, it's just loving and serving each other, and selflessly so. It's not thinking of yourself first. It's thinking of your spouse first. That's a compassionate marriage. That's what life in Christ looks like. So we're talking about, first, how do you have a great marriage? Secrets to a great marriage are your choice, who you pick, the covenant, understanding that marriage is a covenant relationship, and then communication, that you're talking to each other, and then you're showing compassion. And then number 5, you got to have courage. I'm just saying, it takes courage to be married today. See, marriage is a 4-letter word, and it ain't L-O-V-E, it's W-O-R-K. You got to work at marriage. See, that work means W, means that you're worshiping together. That O is overcoming. You're going to have to overcome some things as you do that. R is respect for each other. And then K in work is kindness. It's work. It's worshiping, it's overcoming, it's respect, and it's being kind to one another. Have you ever thought about this? You know, the hardest person to be kind to is often the person that we're closest to. Have you ever seen this in your life, that you can be kind to people around you and yet not be very kind to the spouse you're married to? Man, I've seen that a lot. Why is that so easy? I don't know, but it just means to me that the person I need to be the kindest to is the one I've said, hey, I'm here in this for life. And learn how to have fun. I mean, just learn how to have fun together. Learn to laugh at yourselves and learn to laugh at each other. I mean, life and marriage, there are going to be some funny things. Everything doesn't have to be a cause for combat. There are some things that are just absolutely hilarious. And one of the things that I could say that in my marriage to Stacy is we've learned to laugh with each other, we laugh at each other, and we laugh about some crazy things. I mean, it just may be just that's the maturing process. But I would just say in your marriage, man, enjoy it. Find ways in which you can do some things. And I just say, guys, you need to step up. You remember how it was you dated her? Man, go back to dating her. Come up with ways that you can surprise her. Do stuff. Kidnap her. Take her away for a weekend or an overnight, and you do all the work to find who's going to keep the kids and who's going to take care of it. You do all that leg work, and then you take her away. It'll surprise her. It'll scare her. So when I say kidnap her, don't just walk in, but you make the deal with her boss or wherever she's working. If she's working it outside the home, you cover that at her work. But somebody's got to take the lead. If you want your marriage to be a marriage that goes beyond existence, beyond tolerance, I mean, you're going to have to just absolutely work at it. And that's going to take courage, because we've got a world that loves to say, hey, you can go ahead and quit. If they're not adding excitement, and if there's no love feel in that whole relationship, you just need to get out of it. First off, let me just say this. Love's not a feeling. And if you're looking around for a feeling of love, it just ain't going to happen. So love takes work, and work takes courage. And there are times you're going to have to show a lot of courage as you work and walk through life, through circumstances. Finally, I just want to say this, and when it comes to marriage, if you got children, I really do want you to understand something. Children make great blessings. They make terrible idols. Your reason for marriage shouldn't be your children. Your children are the result of your marriage. But one day they're going to grow up and leave. At least they should. One day they're going to grow up and leave. And it needs to be about you and your spouse. Again, when you make your marriage about your children, then when the children go, your marriage is going to be on shaky ground. Make your marriage about your spouse, about pleasing God, and your kids are going to be fine. They'll see what a healthy marriage is. So those are the secrets I have today for a healthy marriage. And we'll probably talk about this again. We'll get questions about it again. Matter of fact, if you have questions that you'd like for us to consider or deal with, you can do so. You can find us on Facebook at Bucky Kennedy Ministries. You can get questions to us there. You can do it through Instagram. You can do it. You can communicate with us through my webpage at BuckyKennedyMinistries.org. When you're commenting, if you watch this, comment on us. Send us your question if you got some other questions. It can be about marriage. It can be about other things. We'd love to hear from you. And so just let us know. And thank you for supporting us. And you can hear this on a lot of different places, on many podcast platforms, our YouTube channel at Bucky Kennedy Ministries. We're on Facebook, Instagram. The best place just to keep up with us all the time is our app, Bucky Kennedy Ministries app. You can download that. It can help you. Hey, guys, thank you for listening. Rate, review this, share this. You don't even know what it could do to help somebody else in their marriage and their life and their walk with Jesus. It's not about me being famous. It's about Jesus getting known. And so if you would rate, review it, tag us, share us. It's just something that you can be a ministry to others about. God bless you, and thank you for being a part of Bucky Kennedy Podcast.